Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Mason, Democratic Services Officer. Welcome to this meeting of the Executive Scrutiny Board. I received apologies from the Chair, Councillor Repton, so the first item of business is for the Chair to be appointed. Councillor Dinser? And Councillor Martin, you're happy with that? All in agreement? If that's Councillor Martin's Chair, if you'd like to come and join me, Councillor Martin, take over for the next item. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to this extra Executive Scrutiny Board meeting. So we have apologies from Councillor Repton. Do we have any other apologies?
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you.
And Chair, excuse me, I have apologies from Councillors Kerr and Carr.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We don't have any late items. Any declarations of interest? No? Do we all accept and note the minutes of the meetings held on the 14th of June? Yes? Thank you very much. Do we have any comments or observations or points to make regarding the forward plan? Anyone? No? Okay, thank you very much. So, do we need to move straight to exclusions?
We've just got the item 6, Chair, excuse me, for Council Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations.
Oh yes, thank you. Right.
To note, thank you.
Right, okay, that's on the Council Cabinet agenda, okay. Those recommendations, anybody want to make any comments on those? No, thank you. So we now move on to the main item, which is Levelling Up Fund Round 2 applications. Do we need to exclude the present public now?
Chair, we don't know. We've got two parts to this report, so we've moved to the Cabinet agenda now, and the main item,
okay,
the open part. Thank you.
If we take that first of all then, without the exclusion of press and public, and who is actually going to present this today? Rachel North. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to apologise to members initially because the scheduling of a special Cabinet was to allow us to have a Cabinet decision before the submission date for the Levelling Up Round 2 bids, which is the 6th of July, and that has been announced by government over a number of months. But the government, unfortunately, have failed to make their portal web access system work very well, so they've now delayed that deadline for submissions for 2 weeks, so we could have probably done this at a normal Cabinet, so I really apologise for that. It's not in my gift, unfortunately, but I apologise for having a special meeting, unintended, but yeah, thank you for your patience and your awareness of that. So yes, so this report hopefully is relatively straightforward for members. I'm sure everyone is aware of the Levelling Up Fund as part of the Levelling Up ambition by government, very clear intent to try and support projects across the country that level up outcomes for local people more effectively. And this Levelling Up Fund is about capital funding for projects that support culture, regeneration, and things that obviously ultimately support the levelling up of population. They are for applications that are up to £20 million for each, and members will be aware the Council was unsuccessful in the one bid we submitted in round 1 of Levelling Up Fund. But we do have 3 opportunities for bids, because we are able to bid for 20 million, up to 20 million for all of our MPs. We have 3 MPs, and therefore we have the ability to apply for 3 funding allocations. We were, members will be aware, successful at the round 1 working with Derbyshire. Derbyshire were the accountable body, but the bid that went in for transport levelling up for the A50 junction was successful, but that isn't counted against our allocation. So despite that success through Derbyshire, we still have 3 chances to get £20 million times 3, if you like, for projects for Derby. And really, I think this report is about saying we want our share of that money nationally for our projects. So it's really asking for Cabinet to agree to approve or to submit those 3 bids. The three projects are absolutely in line with the Council's ambition to reinvent, reimagine, repurpose our city centre. And members will have had the recent report that came through on our ambition document towards a new vision for Derby City Centre. It's very much these projects are part of what vision is articulated in that document that is now obviously out to conversation with the whole community. So really recognising that reinventing our city centre is a priority for both us and for partners across the city. The context we face in Derby are not unusual to many other places. The structural changes we've seen with the online shopping and loss of high street retail, the impact of COVID around social places to interact, get together, the loss of business activity in our city centre, the lack of significant numbers of city living in our city centre, and our retail core concentrated, you like, in the Derbyam. We are in a position where we have to repurpose, reconsider the future of how Derby City Centre would work, in terms of meeting the needs of our place. And we have to recognise the reality that we are in competition with other places for private sector investment, for public sector investment. This is obviously a part of that public sector investment, and for people to visit and to live and to work in our city to make it a thriving and effective, vibrant place. So absolutely, we recognise, and the work in the ambition document builds on existing track record of progress. We are now seeing the impact of Castle Ward, Nightingale Quarter, people coming to live in the city, the Museum of Making, which opened very successfully last year, the Beckettwell development, which we'll come on to, the Future High Streets Fund we've been allocated for the Eastern Gateway and the Market Hall, the delivery of Phase 1 of our City Our River, and us being long list of City of Culture 25. All those things are building confidence, if you like, in our level of ambition and the future of our city centre, and hopefully making that case for investment. But absolutely, the ambition document is how do we galvanise the whole of our city, everyone, to recognise the change in purpose of our city centre is by putting people at the heart of it, creating places for connection, a destination, creating inspection and experience, and inspiring confidence. So these three projects that we are therefore recommending we're going to bid for. The first one is Assemble, which is part of the critical cultural heart of our city. So on the Assembly Room site, to relocate the existing Derby Learning Theatre, but to grow and build the success of that learning capacity, to be part of creating additional pivotal public space on that site. So creating and making that creative cluster around the quad, the market hall and the guild hall, a space for people to come together. Yes, the learning theatre, great programme, but how do we create a building that is able to open out to the public, grow their outreach and external work they do with other people across the city in different sectors, and also create public sphere within that building that builds activity and footfall and confidence and vitality and vibrancy. The project is a partnership with the University of Derby and Derby Theatre, so very much a partnership project, and that has developed that proposal to relocate and build on the success of the existing learning theatre in this new site, recognising it to have national profile as being one of the only and most effectively successful learning space around theatre production and technical support, and absolutely this use of this site would unlock other private sector and potential other sector contributions and investment for the longer term. So very much about recognising that this cultural activity on this site would unlock further private sector investment. And some of the work we've done already in understanding what the private market's interest is on this site really reinforces they need to see cultural footfall to build confidence, to then build a viable proposal for other private sector investors. It unlocks a lot of future investment, this cultural asset on that site. 4.4 in the report details some of the information that we will be seeing as part of the project. So the additional number of jobs created on the site, the additional number of attendances in the theatre, 25,000 additional visitors, and a GVA impact, 24 million over 30 years of having that cultural facility there, and of course that broader level of city centre confidence and investment in the longer term is bigger than just this site. So the proposal for this bid is to bid for the full 20 million for contribution to this project. The second project is a new hotel on the Becketwell site. Members are really clear that Becketwell is a site of market failure over many, many years. We've been working in partnership with St James's Securities for a number of years now to bring forward private sector investment, over 200 million overall scheme, to create opportunities. So the private rented apartments are now nearly, are come up now, now being bricked at the front, and you can see the success of that project, and that will bring in people living into our city, the public square in the middle at Duckworth, and of course the performance venue on the site, which the council's already is in train of supporting. That would really is going to make a big difference to that brownfield site, but also this is to complete another part of that site that is currently is not allocated for any use, is to put a new 150-bed hotel on that site. A real understanding of the market shows we lack in Derby a quality lifestyle hotel. We've got strong demand from businesses across our, the big businesses, our Rolls-Royce and Alstom, Toyota, but also our small and medium-term businesses. There isn't a real quality hotel that can support some of that need in the city, and this would be complementary to the performance venue itself, which will be a destination, hopefully, for the future for tourists, etc. So that is the second project. And then the third project is the Friargates Goods Yard. I don't need to tell anyone here, I'm sure, the level and symbolic nature of this historic landmark in the city that has sort of sat there really for a long time, far too many decades. 242,000 square foot site. This is a proposal for a mixed-use scheme to include workspace, residential development and green space. It is completely a private sector scheme, so it will be led and delivered by Clowes, the owner of the site and developer. And that's the contribution I'll come to in a minute for the levelling up, but that would be the viability gap, so a gap of between 10 and 12 million for that site to unlock that 200 million, and the levelling up fund bid is for that viability gap to support the overall scheme. Each of the three submissions will require different approaches, and we can come on to that a little bit. All three MPs have confirmed their absolute support for these bids and are doing their bit, both in terms of formally supporting and also lobbying into government. And we've got lots of letters of support from a variety of our partners across the city, just to really to increase the level of clarity about our city's ambition for these three projects. There are a range of financial implications, so it's important to highlight those for members. At this stage, these are about the bids going into government, and should we be successful, that will clearly require us to bring the reports back in the detail to Cabinet to accept that funding, and some of that detail will be worked through in those reports. But there are, at this stage, some key implications to reference for members. There is a statement that we would have the budget to deliver these projects, and the council is agreeing that in terms of the submission, that we have cabinet support or board support, and that's clearly what this report is trying to confirm, and that they're compliant with subsidy control. So those are the key aspects behind it. In terms of the financial implications, Assemble, this would be a project of the balance of the capital required for the scheme to be borrowed through prudential borrowing, and we are asking for the whole 20 million for that project. There will be opportunity as we move forward and create confidence and momentum around this project for additional external funds, we would hope. Clearly that's not confirmed at this stage. The project has got regional significance. We would expect the combined authority to be in place and able to fund. We would expect Arts Council support, etc. So there will be potentially other external funding coming at some point, but that is not obviously in this report. And we're also asking in the report for 700,000 to move to REBA Stage 2 on this project to maintain that momentum. And that will be before we know whether we've been successful or not in the LUF bid. The hotel, the bid is asking 15 million. This particular model and way the project would work would be an operation would generate revenue income, and the operating model would offset that borrowing from the council to meet the gap from 15 million, the overall project. We'll obviously look about the details in the private part of the agenda. And Friargate, as I've said, is between 10 and 12 million, which is the viability gap for that private sector scheme. Overall, the council is the accountable body for the LUF funding, which is why obviously bringing them here. And as I said, further reports on each scheme will be brought to Cabinet should we be successful. And I've got colleagues here to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any comments or questions? Councillor Dinser.
First of all, any funding that we can acquire for Derby City Council and initiatives in the city are welcome. So I hope that we can get the maximum funding that is available for each of these 3 projects. Can I just ask officers about the Assemble initiative? The report indicates that there's a planning committee condition, or that any development needs to be fully costed and things. The report mentions that only 40% of the assembly room site will need to be used for the Assemble project. So that leaves 60% not accounted for. Is that going to cause any difficulties in terms of the criteria that the planning committee have set for the sort of the redevelopment and work for the assembly room site?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the planning permission to demolish the existing assembly rooms building is conditional on having a plan for use of that site, and a costed plan and a real plan that has, robustness behind it. Otherwise, it would be inappropriate to demolish a building of that nature without something to be replacing its place. The judgment call in terms of the planning committee and considering what is appropriate, having this scheme, even on 40% of the land, would be adequate to make the case for that condition being realised, because it's a costed, viable project that would sit on that site, and therefore we would imagine that planning committee would be able to make the decision to discharge that condition, despite the rest of the site not being included. Go on, David, you add some.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit of detail there, because obviously we recognise in the context of developing the whole assembly room site, the planning, the conditions associated with the planning consent for demolition is obviously critical. The dialogue at the moment with planning is that we'd envisage a hybrid application being submitted. So that would consist of a detailed planning application for the theatre and outline consent for the remainder of the site. So the remainder of the site would effectively be establishing a scale and nature mix of uses, if that makes sense. So that could be a combination of commercial office space, residential, and other uses as well. So it's effectively, as I say, it will be a split. It will be a single application, but it would be a hybrid application. So it would be detailed for the theatre, outline for the remainder of the site.
Just to come back on that, Chair. I know this is the initial phase, and we need to sort of progress to make sure we meet the new deadline for making these applications. But I suppose when you build up the detailed case, which you'll bring back as the report indicates, that's where we'll probably need to sort of look further in terms of the detail that Dave, you mentioned just now about the rest of it. Because 60% is quite a significant part of the whole site, and I can foresee some difficulties may be raised by a planning committee if that's not planned. So if you've got plans and they'll be brought forward once the more detailed work is done, then we can look at that at that stage. But that, Chair, is a bit of a concern that I had from this.
The other thing I would just say is what we envisage at present is the as these proposals are set out is clearly the theatre complex would be procured by the City Council. The balance of the site we would envisage being developed with a private sector partner, so it wouldn't be the council alone developing the rest of the site. I mean, clearly it's a massive plus that we have ownership of the site, but you're absolutely right, we do need to fulfil that planning condition before we can actually proceed with demolishing the building, which obviously we have to if we're going to put some new development on the site.
So just for the point of clarity then, David, if you don't mind, what you're saying is that for the 60%, you've got an idea of what you might need to do for the 60%, and you will have to submit a hybrid planning application in order to meet the requirements of the planning committee. But at the moment, you have you actually worked up any plans at all, or spoken to anyone about this, or is this just something that you know you will have to do in order to submit a hybrid planning application?
No. It's something we've given a lot of consideration to. There's already been work done by our specialist property advisors, Avison Young, on the relative viability of various uses across the remainder of that site. Because, to be honest, most uses, including residential, in cities outside of London have a viability gap. So we need to start looking at what the scale of that is to develop out the remainder of the site. But the other thing as well is we're actively now considering appointing a private sector development partner to work with the City Council to co-develop the delivery plan for the regeneration of the city centre. So we've got the city centre ambition activity that's ongoing now as a conversation with various stakeholders and the public. But obviously at some stage we need to start thinking about the delivery of that vision, and we'd like to co-develop at least part of that delivery plan with the private sector, and this site would form part of that. So it's not a theoretical exercise, it would be an exercise led by the council with a partner, but with the partner being the one that has, in a sense, that market-facing intelligence about what uses we think. In other words, not just the mix of uses and scale of uses, but what are the funding and delivery mechanisms to bring them forward? Which use would you build first on the site? All those things that a private sector partner will be able to bring their experience to bear.
Okay, thanks. David, could I ask you to turn your mic off, please, when you're not speaking?
When I'm not speaking? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Because it affects the audibility of everybody else's mic. Thank you very much for that. So in essence, we've got a 40% council development on the Assembly Room site, and potentially 60% of it will be developed by private developers. Right, thank you. Councillor Whitby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Also on the Assemble, I'm also broadly, obviously, in favour of regenerating the city, of course. But just a question of sort of clarification of detail on this, on the uplift in, hopefully, theatre, attendance. Because it's an ambitious target, which is good, of course. But I was just wondering whether the 83,000 a year uplift, is that on 2019 figures or is that 2020 figures? Not being sceptical or anything.
There's been quite a lot of, obviously this analysis has been led not by the council but by Derby Theatre. They've already developed a delivery model because they need to know what the optimum scale configuration is of a new facility for their future business. So these, I'm not exactly sure what the benchmarks are, but this will be in real terms growth. It won't be based on, sort of during COVID, and obviously it's got to be based on pre that. But the whole purpose, of course, of in many ways, Derby is under provided for in terms of theatre provision. But of course, one of the core reasons why this development would be taking place is partly to put it in a far higher profile location, and as Rachel's already touched on, it will be catalytic in terms of its impact on enabling further development in that core city centre. But of course, it's also about growing the business of Derby Theatre, both as a learning theatre and as a performance theatre. So very much the business model at the heart of this development is about net growth in their business. That's obviously at the end of the day, the driver for that is Derby Theatre rather than the council.
Thank you. So what, do we have any sense at the moment of what would be the plan for the existing Derby Theatre site?
So at the moment, the current site obviously is subject to a lease to the University of Derby because they are the accountable body for Derby Theatre. But obviously that's part of the Cale Street asset, which is the Derby on Centre, or the Eagle Centre part of that complex. So I think the Cale Street already are looking at future investment potential of their site, and if the theatre was to vacate that site, obviously that creates another development opportunity in the context of the wider Derby on Centre sort of master plan going forward. So we don't know exactly what use might be on that site, but that would obviously be something for Cale Street to discuss with us as the planning authority going forward.
Councillor Dinther?
In view of the officer's response to the questions that have been raised, I mean, I think maybe the committee, the board should have a recommendation which is about welcoming and supporting the application for identifying more funds for Derby's regeneration, but at the same time understanding that there's more work to be done in terms of some of the detailed build-up, and as quickly as possible to bring any detailed plans to this committee so that we can scrutinise those, which we are not able to do at the moment because of lack of detail.
Thank you, Councillor Dinser. I'm happy to put those to the board. I just have a couple of more questions that I wouldn't mind asking, though, before we take that recommendation. Is that okay? Yeah. So, thank you. So, I'm just, we are actually adding 0.7 million to the capital programme to progress the Assemble project, as it says in 2.2c. And that's what this cabinet paper also wants to approve. I know that before Christmas, or autumn last year, we cabinet agreed a sum of about £200,000 to develop the Assembly Rooms project. So that would make £900,000 just on the sums agreed in the time that I've been a councillor again. Can you tell me what is the total cost, including this projected cost, of developing the project Assemble this far? Thanks.
In terms of, I don't have the exact numbers to date. We've the main focus of the development work to date obviously has been on the pre-demolition activity related to the existing assembly room structure. So there's been work done. There's already a capital budget for that. Beyond that, we actually commissioned, it was actually with the University of Derby, the very initial piece of work which Bennett's did, which you may recall was presented to the council back in, it was very early last year, I think it was. I don't have off the top what the cost of that was, and that was really the very first piece of work. So that was that very early concept design that we all saw the visuals of, which Bennett's undertook, and then the 200 and I think it was 240,000 was the amount, Chair, that you're referring to, which was approved last year. That was to fund the work that's ongoing as we speak, which is a combination of further design development and also building up the business case, looking at the economic impact and all of that, which of course we need to be able to underpin any kind of bid for the likes of Levelling Up Fund or any other funds for that matter. So the amount that's in there is an estimate for taking the design and the business case further forward, because obviously, you know, particularly if we are successful, then obviously there's going to be an awful lot of work to do to accelerate the project. What this is suggesting within this recommendation is that we allow ourselves the resources to continue that work in advance, because if we wait until the autumn, we could stall the project until then, but we've then lost a big chunk of time and momentum in the project. So that's what this resource is being ring-fenced for, is to enable us to keep the professionals on board, etc., with that design development process.
So with regard to the cost then, it's we obviously have the cost of the initial cost of the developing the assembly rooms, or trying to just refurbish and renovate the assembly rooms to begin with, which was abandoned, which I think are in the order of 3 million or so, aren't they? And now you're looking at sums of plus more than 1 million at the very least in order to progress development of the site. Okay, right. Thank you very much. I do have another point. I think I'll take your recommendation now, Councillor Dinser, but I do have another question on this, if that's okay. But as she hasn't spoken yet, I will bring in Councillor Ralston.
I know it's novel. Just on the point that you raised there, I think we need just to confirm clarity on that. It hasn't been my understanding of as a £3 million cost. It's not just around the development; it's around the works getting ready for demolition and the works that would have to be carried out, whatever project was to happen within this site. And I just think we need to confirm an element of the cost to date. You mentioned 3 million that has been part of the project, but ultimately those costs within the assembly rooms, if we are going to demolish, those costs will be part of whatever project. And I think this 0.7 million, if I'm reading this correctly, is a case of that this is the risk that if we didn't get the bids, so we don't progress, but ultimately it can be added to the overall costs of this project. Is that correct?
Yes, that's broadly correct, Councillor Ralston. The council, following the fire at the assembly rooms, carried out a number of surveys, asbestos surveys, structural surveys, and everything else which is required for any option that would have been brought forward, and also for the demolition and making safe working at the assembly rooms. And the report came recently about commencing some of the enabling works for that demolition, and again approval was given. In respect of that, they are all treated as capital expenditure and have been declared in our financial accounts as such in the relevant year. As David Fletcher has said, the 700,000 is to allow us to be in a position, if the funding was to be approved in the autumn, that we could move quickly to the stages of both planning permission and spend, because the Luff bids have a desired spend date, which is detailed in the report, of 25 or 2026, and I think all members will appreciate that this is a complex project, that the more you can be on the front foot in terms of your preparations, the better. So, and again, this money is about designing the scheme up to REBA Stage 2, which gives you a bit more clarity on size and shape and potential cost envelope for the project. So, yes, it's all been reported in each year that expenditure has been incurred and has been treated as capital expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. And we do actually have more detail on the demolition costs in the private papers. So we'll probably come on to that briefly, just to say that, but nevertheless, there was a project to refurbish the assembly rooms, which did start, didn't it, to begin, and then was abandoned at cost.
At the point that obviously the previous scheme had been developed and costs were escalating, the Cabinet appropriately reported that back into this council about what the potential cost could have been of that and the cost incurred up to that point in time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to bring Councillor Dinser back to his recommendation. Did anybody else want to make any comments before I do? I just have a few more comments on this particular thing to add after we've had this recommendation. So, Councillor Dinser, would you like to repeat your recommendation, please?
Chair, do you want me to go through that for you? There are three parts to this, roughly. That the Executive Scrutiny Board welcomes and supports the application to identify funds to develop Project Assemble, but notes that more work is to be done and requests that detailed plans be brought at the earliest opportunity to the Executive Scrutiny Board. So, do you have a second, the Chair, for that?
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Whitby. All those in favour of this recommendation? 3 against? Abstentions? Looks like it's carried. Thank you. So if the board will bear with me, I do have another question. Would anybody else like to add another question at this point? I see Councillor Cooper at the back there is hoping to come in at some point. No? Okay. Let's find it. Okay, 8.4, page 8. There's a passage which says that any increase in costs or slippage in delivery would need to be met from local funds, and secondly, that the spend of the LUF funds should be by March 25 and by March 26 in exceptional circumstances. So basically what this is saying is that if we obviously in the excluded papers there is a little bit more financial detail, which I'm not going to obviously breach that confidentiality, but here we have a scenario where we do, there's a plan for the council to spend so much money and borrow that money, and there's a plan to have some capital, hopefully, if we're successful, and we hope we are, from the Levelling Up Fund. But there's also a point that if the project isn't delivered on time and within budget, that any increase in that would have to be met from local funds. Is that correct?
I mean, it's an interesting point about how perhaps funds are allocated to local areas from central government to local government, but the expectation from central government is that the local will pick up any inflationary costs or additional costs in this scheme and underwrite those as part of this levelling up bid. I mean, that is an expectation from the government. So all the levelling up bids at a national level have the same criteria made against them by government. There's a whole conversation about why that would work in that way, but that is the intention. So clearly, by putting those bids in, if we were to accept them, I mean, clearly we haven't accepted them, I mean, we haven't got them yet, but if we accepted them, we accept them on those terms from government. I think our experience from a national level is that a number of schemes who've been given Levelling Up Fund are less developed than this scheme, so we don't quite understand how that's going to work with government, and then there's obviously some flexibility in that, but the absolutely hard and fast information we're asked to sign up to is as in that part of the report, Chairman.
Okay, well, in the light of that, I do actually have a recommendation myself, which I can put to the board now, or would anybody else like to make any further comments? Councillor Ralston.
I think it's important just to discuss or highlight the fact that this is an opportunity to start to unlock, and it doesn't mean that there isn't future opportunities for other bids to be added to this, or to further investment to come from external sources, whether that's private sector, public sector, arts councils, or whatever it is. I think, for me, this is about unlocking this site, and it's probably a bit early in the day to look at the potential cost to us as a city in terms of longevity and the impact that it may have in terms of the amounts, because ultimately we wouldn't go ahead with this until we've gone through that particular process and we've looked at all other aspects and all of the opportunities to bring in those funds. But absolutely, as a council, we have to look at if that's not the case, but there is an opportunity there, and I think it's important to highlight that there will be other opportunities, whether that's government funding or other external partners funding.
Well, thank you, Councillor Ralston. But actually, without revealing the figures, we do actually have figures in the excluded papers for projected council borrowing to complete these, or to take on these projects. And I don't think anybody is saying that it's not a good idea to try and develop these projects, but we do need to scrutinise the potential borrowing cost to the council, and also the potential impact of a scheme not being delivered on budget or on time. But do you want to come in, Hardy, Mr. Dinter?
Just to sort of open up that discussion about costs, just being careful, or eyes open in terms of what we're doing. Obviously, the government will have that condition that any additional costs will be borne by the council. Does that mean, in terms of the cost of living and the inflationary factors, I mean, at this moment in time, they are rising, and they might be even higher in a couple of months' time? And is that part of the the discussions about what, because the additionality of costs, building and all the capital work will be there. So how is that being negotiated and discussed with the government?
I'm sure Simon will have some comments to make. I mean, the Local Government Association conference last week, I think it was very strong representation from local government to government that, £20 million fund isn't £20 million anymore, is it? Because you've got an inflation of, 10, 11%. So actually, is there a need for government to put more money into levelling up or to think about the parameters of levelling up, etc.? So there is a real recognition that we need to be pushing government to recognise the inflationary costs. But yes, there are some implications to us around taking on that risk, obviously, in terms of the way the criteria is formulated. I'm sure Councillor Simon Riley can answer some questions about that. He isn't a councillor, I do apologise.
No, I'm not a councillor, just for clarity. Rachel has highlighted this very clearly, that the government says at the point of awarding the grants, and obviously Local Government Association is saying that from when this came out in the early part of the year to now, inflation is hitting the market. So will they increase their total grant envelopes? And we would hope they will, but we've got no guarantee of that. The other aspect is, as the accountable body, there are 3 projects here with different delivery routes that we'll explore in the private agenda, and the council will be looking to mitigate those through our relationships and our agreements with the third parties where that is possible. And again, Rachel and David have talked about between now and delivery there may be chance to secure other external funding which helps to mitigate any of that cost risk. And if we got to be also frank, construction costs could come down by the time that we also undertake these projects, because we're having to do it as of our estimate of what we think it could be in 2025, 2026. We know inflation on construction has gone up significantly this year. It's partly due to the economic, partly due to the world political environment. But these schemes, as we talked about, the REBA stage, there's a number of stages to go before we get into agreeing a cost contract with any partner or any contractor. So we have to go in with our eyes open, which I think you're talking about, but it doesn't mean that what is bidding for at the moment will either be our absolute cost or the government's absolute funding. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I would like to put my recommendation now, if that's right. So one of the things I'm concerned about is I accept what's been said, and it is positive, and we must unlock, as you say, we have to move forward as a city. I think everybody agrees that. This is a very ambitious programme, so on the top of a lot of other programmes that have happened in the last few years, in the last 10 years, some fairly major projects run by the council. So I'm concerned that, given that we've got some officer restructuring process on the horizon, that we do have adequate numbers and officers with sufficient levels of competence and experience to lead these projects for the city. So my recommendation, if I may, and I've scribbled it here, would be that given that any increase in costs or slippage in delivery would need to be met from locals funds, executive scrutiny recommends that the council ensures that officers with the necessary skills, competence and experience to deliver major projects are not lost in the forthcoming officer restructuring process. Did you want me to repeat that, Councillor Ralston? And seconded by Councillor Dinser.
I just query the ability for that to be actually taken upon, because ultimately the restructure of whatever plans that are happening within the council at the moment, it's a difficult one to look at potentially. We've got to remember that this is just a bid for funds to potentially do this work, etc. And that should be the focus at the moment, not on the current rejigging of anything. I can understand where you're coming from, and I absolutely agree the fundamental basics that we need to ensure this is a managed project and it's managed well. We've seen the impacts of not managing projects well with the A52, and ultimately managing projects well, like the swimming pool and the benefits that brings. And that isn't just about officers or chief executives or directors, it's about working across with the right partners, etc. So I just query exactly what the relevance is to this particular project in what you're saying around restructures, if I'm honest.
Councillor Dinser?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seconded it on the basis that it's not a question of interfering with any restructuring. At the end of it, we need to have sufficient skills and knowledge and resources to deliver projects. I mean, that's what I pick up from Councillor Alison Martin's recommendation, and that doesn't dictate or interfere with any restructuring. We need to have certain skills and capacities in this council to deliver lots of initiatives, and here we're talking about some major projects. So I think it's relevant, and I support that on that basis. And we're not sort of second guessing any restructuring. That has to happen whatever the plans are, and we look at it when we get the findings of that. But this is about making sure whatever happens, we have the robustness and the skills and the resources to deliver major projects. I support that.
Thank you, Councillor Rinder. Can I just respond slightly then, Councillor Ralston, and then I'll let come in, and then we can just put it to the board, and it's up to the board to decide whether they want to support it or not. But I take your point. This isn't about dictating the process and restructuring in advance and it happening, of course, because that isn't our job, none of our jobs, it's not our role. It's about, as Councillor Dinser said, making sure that we have the competence to match the ambition. And the fact is that whilst I agree that these are potentially future projects, if you look at the timescales for them, then not the need to spend them is within the next few years. So it's imminent, actually, on project terms. And also, we have a regular habit here of spending an awful lot of money on outside consultants. So whilst I do accept that is sometimes necessary, because the council can't hold in-house all the competencies for all the different aspects of the projects the council leads on, and also some of these projects here are working with private partners, fully accept that, but nevertheless it is a council lead, and therefore I think this is just a reminder to the Cabinet, the people who run the council after all, that actually, there's this huge ambition for the city. We have to make sure that the council is properly staffed to meet that ambition. So I'll let you come back, Councillor Ralston, and I'll let you come in, Councillor Cooper, and then I'm going to put this recommendation to the board.
Thank you, Councillor. It's, as I say, it's just around that wording around that you've put in there, future restructuring or current restructuring or whatever. I think I would be personally able to fully support this if it was simply to ensure that we as a council have the correct provision in place of project management or something around those along those lines. I just think it fits better with the current where we're at in this particular project particularly. And I think when we're looking at skill sets amongst our officers and directors, I think it's a very challenging one to have a skill set with a swimming pool versus an arena versus ultimately you're always, as you say, going to have to look at outside support and verifications with external providers. So I get where you're coming from. I support it in terms of project management need and everything else. I just think if we can slightly readjust the wording to take out that current restructuring, or just to look at ensuring that whilst we progress this further, we have the correct skill sets within our councils. I just think it takes the legalities and concerns for me out.
Okay, well, I do accept your point. I actually don't think I think we're on the same point here. I do think it's the same thing. I'm not actually, because it's not saying that, it's just saying that they're not lost in this restructuring process. It's not saying that they're, well, I think we do. I think we have got certain people who've managed things. We have people who've managed things. So I just, but if we don't have them, then we obviously not losing them doesn't mean we can't add them, Nick. So I'm going to stick with what I've said, if that's right, because I think we're saying the same thing. We're saying the same thing, but thank you. But I think we're saying the same thing. But anyway, Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually going to bring up similar to what Councillor Ralston said, even though I know you've put to bed that you're going to stick with the word, and I would just say to you, I think to remove the part where you're making a point about the any officer restructuring, I would implore you to remove that so we can have cross-party consensus. If you're saying we're all on the same page, we're just saying, from what my colleague is saying, that to bring up something that's going off internally within the council where, do you know who you would like to run these schemes if we were successful with a bid? I don't. I don't know these people as well as, the CEO and others that were very close with the senior officers. We've got to let that process go. It's a different process. I think you're mixing the points together. I think the key is that the cabinet, and also maybe a reminder for the CEO, is we need to ensure that there are skills within this council to deliver any project, and that's all I'd say.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dinser.
I think Councillor Cooper's supporting your motion.
I think we're practically on the same page. I really do. I think the point is it's about keeping the skills within the council and not losing skills, and so it's not deferring skills till this point when we ostensibly need them. Sorry, you can come in, Mr. Riley, but you can't make a recommendation on this, I'm afraid.
I'm not making a recommendation. I'm just going to help members with, there are a series of reviews that will happen here. There's the PMO process, which at Gateway 2 talks about making sure the right capacity is in place. There's the Constitution, which says the head of paid service determines the relevant skill mix to deliver. And there's also an amount that has been included in this bid for internal resource and external resource, so internal fees and external fees. So the whole governance process that we operate our projects under basically achieve what you are trying to draw out here. So I just wanted to say that our governance and our programme process is designed to make sure that capacity is in the right place with the right skills. Thank you.
But that's okay, because I'm very compromising, and I know Councillor Whitby wants to go home. So, I mean, given that this is what I've actually written is going to happen, but we want to make sure it does. I think we could just change it to say, to deliver major projects, the skills are competent to deliver major projects are in place within the council. Can we go with that, everyone? So, Ezra, thank you. Right, so I think, okay. Are you still prepared to second that, Councillor?
I am still prepared to second it.
Thank
Chair.
you very much. Thank you. So, thank you for your patience, everybody. All those in favour of that recommendation is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. So, any other comments at this point on the public part of the report? No? So now I have to ask if we all agree for the press and public to be excluded. Yes, so thank you very much.